Hey guys, welcome to episode 2. In this episode, we are going to be talking to R. Blank, CEO of a company called Shield Your Body. He is the son of internationally renowned researcher Dr. Martin Blank in the field of EMF health effects. R. Blank offers products, services and advice on how to use wireless devices safely and what dangers to look out for that may cause us detrimental health effects. I hope you enjoy this one. Thank you so much for doing this. It's a subject I've been reading about on and off for the last few years. Whenever I speak to about it to my friends and family, it just seems to be, it's a case of, well, it's not physical, you can't see it, so there's no issue. And I'm pretty sure you may have heard similar things. I've read your dad's book called Overpowered. Is that your dad's book? Was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing book. And I love I think one of the first lines is like, the first thing everyone does, what I know I do, is like keys, wallet, phone.
It's vital to just living and existing today to have your phone.
That's it. Like the theme of my show for this season is raising a healthy child in a toxic world. So if you could let the listeners know who you are, how you got to where you are, and why you got into EMFs.
Okay, sure. So my name is R. Blank, and I run a company called Shield Your Body. We create a lot of educational materials on the subject of electromagnetic fields, or EMFs, and we make and sell a catalog of laboratory-tested EMF shielding products as well. In terms of how I got into this, as you mentioned, my father was Dr. Martin Blank, and he was one of the world's leading scientists on EMF and health. And it was 10 years ago, and he had a contract to write a book, what became Overpowered. And this book was intended to communicate his view of everything he had learned on the issues of EMF and health and why people should care about it, but to a general audience, not to other scientists, not to academics, not even particularly to activists, but to just normal people. And so he asked me, because at the time I was teaching at, I'd been teaching at University of Southern California, and I'd written a couple of books, and I've done a lot of teaching. And so he asked me for some help. And so I jumped in and we co-wrote what became, as I said, Overpowered. And it was in the course of writing that book that a few key aspects of EMF really hit home to me. In a way, I mean, obviously, you know, my father had been doing this work almost my entire life, so I had some kind of awareness of these issues. But it was really the experience of writing Overpowered with him that really, like I say, hit a few key things home. And one is just how strong the science is. I mean, we're talking about thousands of high quality scientific studies into these questions in a wide variety of negative health effects. It's not just brain tumors, which gets, you know, most of the airtime, but a wide, and we can talk about it, but it's a really wide range. So it's a very strong body of science that's very convincing when you actually look into it. And then you sit back and realize, you know, the sources of these fields, which for those who don't know, is everything that communicates wirelessly. But it's not only everything that communicates wirelessly, it's also anything that runs on power. And you sit back and you think, well, I mean, that's what you're talking about there is the fundamental infrastructure of all of modern life. In other words, you're not getting rid of this stuff, right? So the science says this stuff is definitely bioactive. This stuff is definitely harmful. But on the other hand, you're not getting rid of it. And so I knew there had to be safer ways for people to use and engage with modern technology. And that's where the idea for what became SYB, where that came from. So that was in 2012. In 2013, I released my first product, and it's now 2022. And it's about 24 products. We offer consulting. We also just launched our first course on improved sleep. And we have hundreds of articles. We have dozens of videos and webinar archives. We have the Healthier Tech podcast. And so we've grown in that time, and I anticipate and hope that we continue to.
Wow, amazing. It's interesting you said about helping people sleep. My brother-in-law said, I think it was last year, because I've been listening to podcasts and reading on and off about EMFs because there's quite a few books out there now. And one recommendation was turn off your Wi-Fi in the night
Mm-hmm.
if you have any issues sleeping. So I said that to my brother-in-law. He's like, oh, I'm feeling so weird in the night. I just can't sleep. I was like, do you leave your Wi-Fi on? He was like, yeah. I was like, turn it off. I didn't hear about it. He didn't tell me what happened after. It was only, I think maybe like a month or two later. I just presumed maybe it didn't work. And I said, so how did you actually sleep the other day? He's like, did it? I'm guessing it didn't work. That's why you didn't say anything. He's like, no, I turned it off and he went slept like a baby. And I've been keeping the Wi-Fi off for the last couple of years now, ever since I read about it. But my question is though, like, is it a case of because the Wi-Fi in your house is the most closest to you because there's Wi-Fi all around us, isn't it? So what do you say
Yes.
about that?
Yeah, no, so that's definitely the case. That it's because it's so close to you. The power of EMF radiation diminishes exponentially with distance. So every time you double the distance, you're cutting the power of your exposure by 75%. That's how the law of inverse squares works, which is what this follows. So that's one key reason why turning yours off matters so much, because it's generally the one that's closest to you. But also, you keep in mind, like you can't control the world. Like there's certain exposures you're just going to live with these days. And so where you can make the bigger differences is in the ones that you actually control. So even if you live in an apartment building and you can see, 30 Wi-Fi networks, when you scroll through your wireless menu, you can't control the other 29. All you can control is the 30th, the one right by you. And fortunately, in terms of the impact of your actions, that also tends to be the strongest one that you're being exposed to. So yes, that's also why should never carry your phone in your pocket or in your bra, because when you're doing that, it's directly on your body and you are getting the maximum possible dose that device has to offer.
And what kind of effects does that have if someone? I think I know what you're going to say, but for the listeners out there, put your phone in your pocket, put it in your bra, and another one that is quite common in where I live. Women who wear headscarves, they literally just slide in there. And what do you think?
Well, so I mean, the what we see, what the science, the story the science has been painting for us is that you see negative health outcomes in virtually every system where you investigate for them. And so, I mean, the big ones that get a ton of attention tend to be tumors and cancers. And it makes a lot of sense that those get a lot of attention because those are terrifying. So when you're talking about, holding it up to your head, obviously you're talking about brain tumors and certain other tumors of specific nerves in near your brain in your head. When you're talking about the pocket, you're talking about prostate cancer and colorectal cancer. And when you're talking about the breast, you're talking about breast cancer. And by the way, that isn't just true for women. Many men carry their phones in their suit jacket breast pockets, and men get breast cancer too. But there are numerous other negative health, right? So just because something doesn't give you cancer doesn't mean it's safe. So one of the strongest areas of science, in fact, is in areas of male infertility and subfertility. There's a tremendous amount of science on this. And so men who carry their phones in their pockets, also men who use their laptops on their laps, have very strongly demonstrated correlations between that behavior and reduced sperm count and reduced sperm health. When it comes to women, women who, for instance, are exposed to higher levels of EMF when they are pregnant have significantly greater risks or rates of miscarriage. They also have significantly greater risks of their child developing birth defects. You can call it negative health effects within their young life, right? So, for instance, there's a study about women who are exposed to higher rates of EMF when they are pregnant, and you have increased rates of ADHD in the children by the time that they are 13. So that's not an immediate outcome. That's when that's delayed by a while. So those are examples, but and I point those out because of what we're talking about in terms of, you know, the use case of phones in pockets and in bras. By the way, I don't know, you know, sometimes you talk to younger men and you say, wow, you know, this is strongly linked to infertility and subfertility. And like, I don't want to get anybody pregnant either. So then I say, well, do you know that there's a growing body of science linking it to erectile dysfunction? And then suddenly you start getting a bit more attention. But, you know, one of the, as you were just saying with the anecdote from your brother-in-law, there's very strong links between EMF exposure in general and endocrine system function. And part of endocrine system function is melatonin production, which regulates the circadian rhythm in your sleep cycle. And so that is one of the suspected mechanisms by which EMF interferes with your sleep so much. And so even though, you know, the phone in your pocket is down by your waist, it's interfering with your entire body because, yes, your strong exposures are down in that region, but it's still exposing your body. And for the other thing to remember about phones and pockets isn't just the proximity or how close it is to your body. It's also how long you tend to do it, right? You don't put your phone in your pocket for a minute. You tend to do it for hours and every day. And so we're talking about really significant exposures when you add it all up. And that's exactly the kind of thing that can have these wide-ranging impacts, not just in the most obvious candidate locations, like in the gonads or in the brain or whatever it might be.
I remember there was a couple of years ago. I'm pretty sure you may have seen it. There's a lecture on YouTube from a lady who basically got smoking banned on airplanes, and she I think the lecture was in Australia. She's from America, and she was basically saying how actually, if you look on your phone, if you go to the settings and go to legal, it actually tells you that you shouldn't actually keep your phone too close to your pocket anyway.
That's correct.
And when somebody said to me there could be a problem with this with our health, I said, oh, don't be ridiculous. If there was a problem, I'd know about it. Well, I was wrong. And what I now know is that information is being sent to people routinely to give them safety information. I'm going to ask you to help me out here by looking at how many of you have an iPhone. Now, I have to go to General, all right? Under General, under Settings. Then go to About, which is at the top. You got there? About, yes? Okay. Now you have to scroll all the way down to something you don't normally see, called Legal. You got to Legal? All right. Now click on RF exposure. Now you can read it later, but it's basically telling you that you need to know that you cannot keep the phone directly next to your body without exceeding the as-tested exposure guidelines. And by the way, the iPhone does it. I happen to know how to find it on the iPhone. I'm just learning the Android system myself. But all smartphones come with some information that basically says, don't keep the phone in your pocket or you will exceed the as-tested exposure guidelines. Now, how many of you knew that before today?
Correct.
And
I haven't seen that video, but that's something I often mention. So the one example I give most often is the iPhone, but it's actually multiple models. And yes, they call that for a minimum distance of separation in order to be at or below radiation safety, maximum radiation safety levels. So, you know, but most people, and by the way, it's not just that, I mean, that applies to carrying your phone in your pocket or not carrying your phone in your pocket as it may be, but keep that in mind. They're saying there has to be a minimum distance in order for it to be, you know, quote unquote safe for a product that's designed to be held up against you, directly up against your head, right? So the main use case that this thing is designed for is one that if you put the pieces you connect the dots, is one that they're admitting is not safe. And they're just allowed to play this dance where they design a product to be held right up against you and used right up against your body, but then they put in a little legal fine print that no, you shouldn't really.
That's right. And also, and I'm sure you know about this as well. You most like probably can explain it better as well. So the way they test mobile phones is basically based on a guy called Sam, a mannequin called Sam. And if you could just talk about that a little bit.
Sure. And I used to know this. I forget what SAM stands for. But so Sam obviously isn't human. He is a doll, effectively, and he's filled with certain types of fluids that are meant to mimic the density of our body and so forth. The thing is with Sam, well, actually, in order to explain Sam, I have to step back one step, which is cell phone radiation is not regulated by how much radiation the phone gives off. Cell phone radiation is regulated based on how much radiation you absorb from the phone, right? And so in order to measure how much radiation you absorb from the phone, they don't measure you. Obviously, you know that. You've never been to the lab to take the test. They have this standardized dummy named Sam. And Sam is designed to emulate, I believe it is a 6'2",
250-pound army guy, right?
Yeah. So, which is larger than 95% of the human population. And so if you're any smaller than this guy who's bigger than 95% of humanity, you will be absorbing more radiation than that dummy does in the lab. And so that is just one of the many flaws that are built, or should we say baked into the cake of how cell phone radiations regulations are created and enforced. Another one is that, you know, when, and I don't know exactly how it is in the UK. I mean, I know roughly how it is in the UK, but I know much more about the United States. But, you know, the government is the one that sets these standards, right? So in the United States, it's the Federal Communications Commission, or FCC. And so a lot of people just think, right, oh, well, the government must be testing these phones. And that's not at all how it goes. So like when Apple has a new iPhone to release, Apple hires a lab. The lab tests the phone. So Apple has paid a private lab to do these tests on the radiation absorption resulting from using the iPhone. There's no guidance or regulation on where the phone is held, how strong the signal is, right? Because the weaker the signal, the more radiation your phone is putting out. There's no, as far as I've been able to tell, there's no standard in terms of how many wireless connections are active on the phone at the time, right? Because cell phones aren't just cell phones. They are cell data, they are Wi-Fi, they are Bluetooth, they are NFC. There's multiple wireless cards in each one. So anyway, getting back to the main point, the government doesn't test this stuff. They let the companies do it, and they let the companies be pretty arbitrary with how this is done. And so as a result, I don't know if you have heard, I mean, you sound pretty well informed. You may well, I may be well just telling you something you already know, but a few years ago in France, they were able to get the government to test, it was about 300 phones. Wow. By themselves. So they didn't just rely on the manufacturers. The government itself went and tested about 300 models of phones. And 88% of them were found to emit more radiation than the manufacturers said they did.
Wow.
And several of the models were actually recalled because they emitted more radiation than was legally allowed. And so that is a great example or a great illustration of what I think you would find if you just had that as a standard policy, where you were testing the government was actually testing these phones. You would find that almost all of them emit more radiation than the manufacturers claim, because there's no way to test, right? So if I wanted to test, and you came to me and you said, I want to see how much radiation is coming off of my TV. I could say, okay, here's the kind of meter you can buy, and here's how you use it. But the thing is that's what you can easily measure at home are radiation emissions, right? You can see how much radiation is coming off your TV. But the way the whole cell phone system is regulated, the radiation side of it is absorption, as we've just talked about.
That's right.
There is no way for you to test that at home. So there's no way to like for me or you to just get the right meter and measure an iPhone and say, wow, that's way higher than they say. The whole thing is designed in such a way as to disempower consumers and just convolute the entire issue.
Wow. And I can imagine, because it all goes down to it's affecting us on a cellular level, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, there's several. So I'll give a few examples. One was actually some of the work my father did, was most well known for in his career. And what he showed is that exposure to even low levels of EMF radiation triggers the cellular stress response, releasing heat shock proteins. And what the way that he explained it is that this shows that the body is interpreting EMF as a stressor, as a threat, as something to react against. Whether or not we feel it, our cells recognize it. Another great example of the way this impacts us on the cellular level is the work of Dr. Henry Lai and Dr. Narendra Singh. This was in the 1990s. Their work was around cordless phones, because again, it was the 90s. And cell phones weren't as popular. And what they showed is that even short exposures to cordless phone radiation led to increases in strand breaks of DNA. That means, DNA is made up of two strands. So when the strand breaks, that's what it sounds like. The strand is actually just broken. If both strands break, the cell kills itself. If only one strand breaks, the cell will try to recreate it from the mirror image information in the other strand. And that is a mechanism by which mutations occur, which is a mechanism by which disease forms.
Hey guys, just a quick break. I just want to say thank you to my sponsors for today's episode. Sun Chlorella, amazing supplement. It's got active B12, it detoxes, it's a chelator, so it removes heavy metals from the body. I give it to my kids, my clients, and my family. Check it out.
They more concerningly, or I don't know if it's more concerningly, adding to the concern of their findings was that the damage continued for hours after the exposure, or I should say the increased rates of damage remained for hours after the exposure.
And that links to the example that your dad put in the book, where it says about the thunderstorm, the story about the thunderstorm. And the Lancet put it in their report, where basically there was a thunderstorm. They're playing golf somewhere in America, and 2 people got injured, and the one that had a heart attack was like 3 weeks later, and they confirmed that it was because of EMF.
Yeah, I'd actually forgotten. Maybe I should pick up the book again. I've forgotten that anecdote.
I thought it was a terrific example how it's not a case of there's a lot of I guess thought about, if it's not happening to me now, then we're fine. But actually, it is a case of, well, it's not going to happen today. It's not going to happen to you tomorrow. It could happen to you like any time later on, right?
Yeah, well, that's really what's one of the critical issues to realize when it comes to EMF. Because, right, so we've talked about some of the flaws in cell phone radiation regulations. But at least they exist, right? It's better that they exist than they don't exist. Yeah. So, but why is it better, right? If I'm saying they don't protect you, why is it better? Because they do actually protect you from certain things, right? And so what are those things that they're protecting you from? And this gets back to what you were just saying about immediate versus non-immediate. Enough EMF radiation of the kind that cell phones give off, enough of that can cook. And that is, in fact, the exact way a microwave oven cooks. Microwave ovens use microwaves. Microwaves are EMF radiation of the kind that are used by cell phones and cordless phones and Wi-Fi. So if you have enough of that, you can actually cook, like literally cook food, or, unfortunately, you. And so and the threshold at which that happens is referred to as the thermal effect, right? So that's when when there's enough EMF radiation, you can trigger the thermal effect, and that is an instance of immediate harm. And that is what cell phone radiation regulation is based around, preventing triggering the thermal effect. In fact, it's what essentially every EMF radiation regulation in the world that impacts consumers That's what it's based on, is preventing the thermal impact, the thermal effect. And that's good, right? We definitely don't want the thermal effect. We don't want to be exposed to enough EMF radiation where it's cooking us. So, but that is the only immediate impact of EMF radiation, and that's what the regulations are designed to protect us against. But the whole wide array of negative health outcomes, some of which we've already talked about here, but which extend even much further than just, cancer and infertility, all of those are non-immediate. They happen at levels far lower than what trigger the thermal impact. And that is precisely what is so challenging to get implemented, or at least even recognized in the regulations, that not all damage from EMF is immediate. Some of it, in fact, a lot of it, happens later. And as a result, not just of one exposure, but cumulative exposures and a lifetime of cumulative exposures. And so, yes, I think you hit on something very, very vital to the whole debate.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned microwave ovens. I think I listened in your previous podcast where you said that I think your father didn't allow you to use a microwave. Is that correct? Or
we just never had one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
was there a reason for? Was that because of the EMF stuff, or did you just never use one anyway?
Yeah, no, it was because of the EMF. We never had one.
Okay. So is that so? Because I have my own view on why I haven't been using a microwave. But is your view because of the radiation that comes out, or the radiation that affects the food that you're eating?
So, well, for me, it's about the radiation emissions, which are incredibly high. I also I have suspicions in terms of what it does to the quality of the food. And my understanding is that there is a growing body of science on that question, but I am not familiar. In fact, this is actually, I think, the fourth time in 2 weeks I've been asked that question in an interview. So maybe I should do a little reading up on it. But it doesn't impact me at all, right? Because I don't use microwaves, so it's just not a high priority for me. But it also, I have no problem believing that could be the case, right? This is very powerful stuff, and I've seen what it can do to the body. So wouldn't surprise me that it alters foods in ways that impact their reaction in our body, or the resulting nutritional value, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, because from my view, from what I've read and from my understanding of it is, Dr. McCullough, he put a research paper on microwaving foods and what effect it had on the actual nutritional loss. And there are mixed research about it. So from his research, I think it was from Sweden, they said that broccoli that was cooked in a microwave lost 97% of its antioxidants. And
wow.
From me as a health coach, what I tell my clients is you should eat whole foods, not something that's you can get vitamin supplements that are separated.
Mm-hmm.
For me, from my point of view, everything should be whole, and it's a reason why it's whole, because each component supports each other when you eat it. So if the broccoli has lost 97% of its antioxidants, that means it's no longer whole anymore. You're not eating a food anymore. So that's my point of view. But then there's other reports. I remember the BBC put on YouTube, and they said that I think it was a pepper, and it increases vitamin C content. But at the same time, it didn't actually tell you what was lost. And then it goes back to what I said about a whole food. There's a reason why a whole food is a whole food, because it needs everything together for you to nourish the body. So, yeah, I mean, that's my take on it. I would love to, if you have any research in the future, I'd love to, see that also. That'd be great.
Sure. Yeah. If I do. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great. And on ionizing EMF versus ionizing, and that, I think that we've kind of covered it, where this comes down to the thermal effect, right?
No. So,
okay.
And great question. So the thermal effect is a question of power. And so how much power the field has, or that energy has, right? So at a certain level of power, you can transmit a cell phone signal. If you boost the power, that same frequency can cook, right? So that's a question of power. Ionizing versus non-ionizing is a question of energy. And I know this is, I had to learn this too, right? Because power and energy are often used interchangeably. like give it more energy, give it more power, right? You think that's the same thing, but when it comes to EMF, that's not the case. Power is like volume, right? So it's talking like this versus talking like this, right? That's more power. Energy is frequency. So that's talking, for instance, at a higher pitch or a lower pitch. And so, right, EMF exists on this spectrum of frequencies. And right in the middle is visible light, like we get from the sun. In fact, for billions of years of life on Earth, that was essentially the only form of EMF that all life was exposed to.
That's right. Yeah.
Now, if there's certain forms of EMF with higher energy, with more energy, or you might say higher frequencies than visible light, and those include things like X-rays and gamma rays, and those have so much energy that they have enough energy to knock electrons loose from the cells in your body. And that's why they are called ionizing, because these fields, even in very low power levels, can ionize the cells in your body. And that causes immediate and significant and severe harm.
And is that part of the reason why the doctors tend to hide behind the wall when they do X-ray?
Yeah, that's exactly why. And they cover you in a lead jacket if they're, yeah. And you want to minimize the amount of X-rays that you get in your life. I mean, because if you need an X-ray, they're a great tool, but you don't need more than you need. And each one comes at a cost to you. So that's what ionizing radiation is. Non-ionizing are all the forms of EMF with less energy than visible light. And those are all the ones that we've been talking. So microwave and radio frequency for wireless communication, ELF or extremely low frequency for things that come off of power lines. These are the key forms of EMF that I and people, who talk on these topics, those are the types that we're talking about. So whenever you hear about cell phone radiation or power line radiation, that's always non-ionizing. Even if it gets to the level of power, like a microwave oven that can cook food, it's still non-ionizing. It's just at a higher level of power.
Wow. Going back to actually children, so how can devices now, because nowadays we talked about mobile phones, how it's tested on a dummy that's really big. And then nowadays you're getting up to 8-year-old kids having mobile phones now in their
younger. Yeah.
That YouTube video I was telling you about, she was saying how because the skull of a child is thinner than an adult. Mm-hmm. So could you talk about that?
Sure. Well, I mean, you just said it. The skull of a child is thinner than an adult. The skull provides a degree, it's not perfect, but a degree of natural shielding. So the thinner the skull, the less natural shielding there is. By the way, that's another reason why holding your phone up to your head or using AirPods, Bluetooth headsets, that's one of the most vulnerable places on your head, because there's a gap in the skull for the ears to work. That's where the ear canal runs through. So the less skull that you have, the thinner a skull that you have, the less natural shielding you have in place. But it goes beyond that, right? Because a child's brain is smaller than yours, right? That's part of, until they grow up, their brains are smaller. So if, for instance, you had just to pull an example, if you had a field of cell phone radiation that extended 1 inch into the brain, that is going to impact much more of the child's brain than it would of your brain on a percentage basis. So those are two of the reasons right there. Another is that damage from children are growing, right? Obviously, which means that their cells are dividing much more rapidly than once you grow older. And that means any damage to a cell, for instance, that type of genetic damage I was talking about earlier with the lie and sing studies, that replicates faster to more of the body than it would in an adult. And then, of course, finally, you have the fact that the child has much longer to live, right? So they hopefully, right? And so they will have much longer to deal with or cope with the damage that results from these exposures. And of course, keeping in mind that they're already being exposed to much more radiation than I was when I was a kid, you were when you were a kid. That means by the time they're my age, they're still going to be exposed to more radiation than someone my age today, right? So they're facing a lifetime. They're not just having increased exposures now and then having to physiologically cope with those exposures over life. They are facing a life of increased exposures. And these are some of the reasons why, in general, children are more vulnerable than adults. And I will say babies are more vulnerable than children, and fetuses are more vulnerable than babies. Because the further back down that chain you go, right, the more these issues impact you. And now there's also several other, right? So for instance, we seem to be seeing that certain types of EMF exposures negatively impact learning capacity, the capacity to form new memories. Now, my reading of the science right now also makes it a little hard to know how much of that is due to EMF versus how much of that is due to just using phones, right? So it's not the EMF from the phone, it's the experience of the phone, it's the experience of the screen, it's the experience of social networks. All of this can contribute to these outcomes. But we are still, once you have those negative impacts on learning, on memory that early in life, that creates knock-on effects that follow that child or individual for the rest of their lives.
And what kind of issues are we talking about here? So I know for a fact that blue light and sleep will affect the child from using the devices, because sometimes you have children that are just on the devices till late in the night, and they just eventually just can't sleep in a routine basis, isn't it?
Yes, but it's not. I mean, blue light is a big part of this, but it's also EMF. So that's right. Your Wi-Fi router isn't. I mean, in general, isn't emitting blue light. That's not the reason it's negatively impacting your sleep. It's but blue light also contributes. And to be clear, blue light is a type of EMF. All visible light is a type of EMF, but it's generally considered a little bit differently because you can see it, and so more people believe it, I guess.
Yeah.
But so yeah, I mean, so sleep disruption is just a part of the developmental disruption. There are studies now, for instance, showing that just having a cell phone in the classroom accessible to the child leads to significantly diminished grades or test performance. There is research into the negative impact of cell phone use on the development of figural memory skills. I mean, this is, and again, for some of these types of studies, I mean, to be totally fair, it's not clear where the impact is coming from EMF or the phone or both, right? So I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Having a cell phone, sleeping with a cell phone in your bedroom is pretty bad, right? And for the same reason that having your Wi-Fi router on is bad. Although probably even worse, because the phone is probably right next to your head, and some people sleep with it under their pillow.
Yeah, I see that a lot.
Yeah, and that's really bad from an EMF perspective. That said, there is research that shows that just having your phone in your room, even off, totally powered down, negatively impacts your sleep. And that is because of these kind of addiction mechanisms that get formed in your brain and your relationship with this device, where even though it's off, you kind of expect like it could give you a notification at any moment. And that alone, that force is enough to disrupt your sleep. So that's an example where, yes, the EMF disrupts your sleep, but also the phone without the EMF disrupts your sleep. And we are seeing, I believe we are seeing more and more of that kind of complexity being painted by the more research that is being done now into, shall we say, the social science aspect of our relationship with devices, just as much as our biophysiological relationship with EMF from these devices.
Yeah, sure. So what I do instead of leaving the Wi-Fi on iPad, I download all the videos on and then turn it on airplane mode. Is that better?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, airplane mode is fantastic. So when you put your phone into airplane mode, you are essentially eliminating all of the EMF. There's still going to be a tiny little bit because it's still running on power. But for all intents and purposes, what I tell people is that it cuts off the EMF because it cuts off so much of it. And yes, there is a, some people, when they hear airplane mode, they think, oh, my phone's a useless brick in airplane mode. But no, like you just pointed out, there's a lot you can do. You can download videos, you can download podcasts. Obviously, the alarms will still work. Certain games will still work. Your calendar notifications will still disrupt you. All this stuff will still, so your phones can still do a lot in airplane mode, but then you don't have all of these exposures.
I think the one pickle I have with that in my own experience is like you literally can't call anyone. That's the main thing.
Right.
Isn't it? That's the only thing, isn't it? Like you literally, I'm just thinking if there's an emergency call and you're going for a walk, like, so I go for a walk every morning while everyone's asleep because the sun's out, and once it's winter, it's a bit too much. So I go for a walk and I leave my phone at home, but if I don't know, it's not. What I used to do or thought was like, well, let's say someone needed to call me right now. What would you say about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll tell you, as someone whose phone has been in airplane mode almost entirely for like the past 10 years.
Wow.
That's an exaggeration, but it's in airplane mode a lot, and it's in do not disturb mode even more. You don't need your phone on as much as you think you do, and the more you keep it off, the more those around you are trained to expect that it will be off. Now, that said, if you need your phone on, you need your phone on.
Yeah.
And that's where you want to keep as much distance as possible. But again, if you're walking around, you can't keep it 10 feet away from you. You're walking around. And so that's a really good example of where EMF protection products come in. And that's like the type of product that I make and sell at my company, Shield Your Body. So in fact, my most popular product is one that addresses that specific use case. It's called the phone pouch.
I looked at it and I was like, you know what? I'm just a bit iffy about stickers. I'm not too sure about them. The stickers, and then you have
well, we don't have the stickers. So
what is how does the stickers work? And if it does it work? Because I know when I watched Dr. McCall had someone on there. And he was saying the stickers don't work, but then you got companies selling it, saying that it does, and then for me,
so the way I answer that question, because there's a lot of types of offers out there for EMF protection. There's stickers, there's crystals, there's harmonizers, there's rocks. There's all sorts of things that claim to be EMF protection. And the way, when someone asks me about one of those, the way I answer is I have never seen any science that would explain the way they work or that shows that they work. Now, that doesn't mean they don't work. Mm-hmm. It just means I don't understand how they would work, and I've never seen any proof that they do work. And that is in contrast to the types of products I make. So when I don't know if you caught it, but earlier in the conversation when I was introducing myself, I mentioned that Shield Your Body makes EMF shielding products, which is a type of EMF protection, but it's a type that is universally accepted. It's based on a technology that's almost 200 years old, since the British scientist Michael Faraday created the first Faraday cage. And what he did is he showed that if you weave conductive metals into certain patterns, you can block and deflect EMF radiation in the other direction, the way that a window shade blocks and deflects sunlight. And so it's just that in the last 180 years or so, technology has gotten better. So you don't need like thick fences. You can actually get really, really thin fibers and weave them into fabrics. And so that's how my products work. And what that means is not only that they're based on universally accepted technology, and not only is it testable in a lab, but you can test it for yourself at home using equipment of a sufficient quality, right? So that means you can't get away with a $30 or £30 meter, but neither do you need a $10,000 meter. You need about what goes for in the United States $150 meter, and you can see for yourself that my products actually do what I say that they do. So that's what separates a product like mine from products like stickers or crystals.
That's really comforting to know. because you talk about meters as well. Because I remember I was in the car with a friend, and he bought like a EMF meter from Wish, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
£15, and he put it over my phone, and it was blowing up like the meter,
That's
but
about all I can detect, though, is if it like if it's super high. I mean, in general, I don't know that meter in particular,
yeah.
but those cheap meters, if you put it somewhere where it's super high, they go off, and otherwise, you can't really rely on it detecting much of anything, even if you have kind of elevated levels.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because even
So,
when we drove past because we were driving at the time, we drove past a 5G mast and it just went off as we were passing
mhm.
by. But is that just down to because it was really high? That's the only really reason that it
Yeah,
kind of worked.
yes,
Right. Interesting.
yeah, and
Makes sense.
so I have a free ebook because I don't make or sell EMF meters, but I have a free ebook in which, because I get this question a lot, and I also don't like people using bad meters. So I put together an ebook that explains how to test. It has meter recommendations in it. And again, I don't make or sell them. I don't even get affiliate commissions out of those referrals. It's just the ones I recommend.
Hmm.
And then I also explain how to use them, how to understand the units that you're getting out of them, comparing it to international safety recommendations. And that's now actually it's in its 6th edition, and that's available for free on my website. And I'd strongly recommend anyone who's interested in EMF testing to check out that ebook.
Great, great. And wireless headphones, what do you think about those? Especially for kids, because the theme is like raising a healthy child. I'm seeing more and more kids now, even teenagers, with the Apple wireless headphones,
Yeah,
and
no,
I'm
it's
just
I
thinking that must be like frying something in your brain, right?
well, so that's the same type of radiation. So those use Bluetooth, which is the same type of radiation as Wi-Fi, except it tends to be lower power because so the way it goes is cell phones have the most power because they need to communicate miles. Wi-Fi has less power because it needs to be able to communicate 150, 200 feet, maybe 300 feet. And then Bluetooth has the least amount of power because it needs to communicate anywhere from 10 to 30 feet. So it's the same type of radiation as Wi-Fi, but with lower power. But it's right against your body in a particularly vulnerable part of your body, right? Where as I was just talking about earlier, right? It's not just against your head, near your brain. It's also in a part of your head where there's no skull to provide that limited amount of natural shielding. And you tend to use it for extended periods of time. So while it might be lower power, that doesn't mean your exposure is lower because again, it's right against, remember the distance factor.
Yeah.
It's right up against your body. And particularly, I don't think anybody should be using Bluetooth wearables. There is no way to use a pair of Bluetooth headsets more safely, right? Because remember, I was talking about distance being your friend. You can't use Bluetooth headsets at a greater distance. You can only use it against your body, and there's no ability to put shielding in place because you need it to you need an unobstructed channel from the headset to your eardrum. So there's no ability to use it more safely at all. And again, you're encouraging generally longer term exposures, right? We're not just talking about 2 minutes. We're talking about 2 hours or 3 hours. I see some people wear them literally all day long. And
Taxi
I can understand
drivers.
why it feels like it's cool,
Yeah.
but it's like super risky, man. Like that. And then for children in particular, they're more vulnerable to damage. But again, keeping in mind, this is in addition to all their other exposures that they're getting from their phones, like you meant, from their Wi-Fi in their schools, from their friends' phones. They're getting just way more exposures than you or I got when we were kids, and they are facing a whole lifetime of exposures. Now, to specifically address your question, what does using AirPods for 10 years do? There is no answer to that question yet because they weren't forced to do that kind of testing before releasing the product. That's not how wireless technology is, how it works, right? They release the product, and then we get to use it for 10 years. And then scientists can see what it does after 10 years of use. So we don't yet know what using AirPods for 10 years will do. But again, there is quite a bit of science at this point on a whole other assortment of sources of EMF, whether you're talking about power lines or Wi-Fi or cell phones or cordless phones. We know what those exposures do. And so we can make educated guesses that what types of impacts this will have on children who are starting to use them super young, using them for extended periods of time, and who will likely continue using them for decades, what types of impact that'll have. And it to me looks, so in general, I want to be clear, I am not the kind of person, even though I talk about EMF issues a lot, I'm not the kind of person to advocate against using technologies. I advocate for more intentional use, more mindful use, just being aware of the health risks of what you're doing and keeping that in mind when you make your technology decisions. But when it comes to technology like AirPods, when it comes to technology like, the Facebook Ray-Ban glasses or the Snapchat glasses, when it comes to these types of technologies that are both wearable and just simply impossible to protect against, because there's no way to use them at a bigger distance and there's no way to put shielding in place, I really don't believe that people should be using these. So that is my perspective.
And surely the answer is wired headphones for kids, right? Because I just
Yes.
feel the only other option is a wired headphone. It might be cool having less wires, but for health reasons, it should be wired. That's it.
Yep, that is it. We make the SYB air tube headset, and air tubes, instead of having wire go the whole way, they convert the sound to air. And then we use air in a tube, hence the name air tube, to get the sound up to your ear. And so for people who want to even cut out those exposures, you can use a product like the SYB air tubes. But again, I don't want to discourage people from using wired headsets because they are just so much safer.
Yeah, and that's the main thing, isn't it? We're not here to talk about that. Don't stop using technology altogether. It's just finding a safer way. That's all it is. We're just trying to find a safer way because, it just seems like you remember when cigarettes were healthy, and then they found out they weren't.
Yeah, they had doctors doing the ads.
Yeah, and it seems like it's the same situation, just a different product.
Yeah, except the difference is that tobacco essentially provides no value. It is just a vice. Whereas this stuff does provide a tremendous amount of value. Yeah. And so there is no banning it. There certainly could be better regulation. But there is no banning it. There is no getting rid of it. You can't just really, it's not practical to go around and say, hey, you should quit tech. Hey, you should quit tech. The way it is like, hey, man, you really should quit smoking. And so that is a fundamental difference in the nature of whether you want to view it as a pollutant or a toxin. That is a very fundamental difference. Now, just despite that difference, there are many similarities between how the tobacco industry reacted to the science, and I should say similarities, the way the tobacco industry reacted to emerging science and the wireless industry, for instance, reacted to emerging science. So we see a lot of what is called or referred to as the tobacco playbook in use in terms of how industry interacts with science, addresses science, funds media in order to muddy this issue longer to eke out more profits. But again, I don't feel like they need to, because no one is talking about getting rid of this stuff. No one that is not. And so all they are doing is delaying improved regulations that would save lives and improve health. And that is, to me, it's unfortunate because they're not facing the same existential threat that tobacco was, in my opinion. No one is going to talk about, we might talk about getting rid of some stupid products like, wireless tampons, like smart tampons, like
Oh, I
that,
heard about that.
yeah,
Like wireless teddy bears, nappies for kids.
yeah. So
Uh,
we might at the edges be able to, you know, get rid of some of the really stupid exposures. But in general, I mean, no one is talking about banning cell phones. No one is talking about banning Wi-Fi. And so, yeah, like I say, it's just from that perspective, it's a fundamentally different issue. It is my opinion that the tech industry, you know, really should be open to this kind of thing. Because again, you know, at least I can speak for myself. I am not anti-tech. I'm very pro-tech, in fact, in terms, I mean, just look around us at all we have accomplished with technology. It is remarkable, but it is also a little bit out of control. And it would be very healthy for the world and for us as humans if we were able to exert some more control over the technology.
100%. And there's a thing about electric cars, isn't there? They're not tested, are they?
Yeah, I have no idea if they are or not. If they are, they don't have to publish it. It's but it's not just electric cars; it's all cars, right? Even conventional engine cars now come with so many wireless doodads that you know you don't have to be in an electric car to get a high exposure. And so you'd think, you know, if you're putting in, you know, Wi-Fi and LiDAR and Bluetooth and, you know, all of these NFC and all of these other fancy technologies that allows your car to interact with your devices and with external networks, that they should at least tell you what your exposure is. But they don't. And it's there's a whole set of exposures, right, that are just totally unregulated.
Mm-hmm.
And so an example I give in the United States is power lines. You know, power lines can be a source of huge exposures depending on the grid where you live, how close you are to the power line or the transformer on the power line. Like that could be a really big exposure for you. But there is literally no regulations determining what those emissions are legally allowed to be.
Wow. Wow. Is the body an antenna?
So yes.
So
Yeah.
I hear a lot of people who are into EMF and the dangers and stuff. They say essentially the body's an antenna because we're electrical beings.
Yeah, I mean, that's how our body functions, right? I mean, it's literally by sending electromagnetic signals through our nerves, and right, that's how the brain controls the rest of your body. That's how the body communicates back to the brain, is using electrical signals, which are low-powered EMF. And so, obviously, the nervous system is quite capable of conducting these types of signals. My father had a theory, which he published, that DNA itself is a fractal antenna, which would serve to amplify the impact of EMF, because that's how fractal antennas work. That's how they get such powerful antennas into tiny little phones, is because they are engineered as fractal antennas, which again amplify or magnify the power of the function of the antenna. So yes, there's plenty of reason that's a good question.
Top 3 tips for saving children from EMF exposure.
Well, so children in particular. Well, they're all, yeah. So one is to not use any, don't get them wearable tech like the AirPods or, and that's the most popular one as far as I understand. But, as the glasses get more popular, don't give them the glasses. Don't use wearable tech. Delay as long as possible when you get them a cell phone, because once you get them a cell phone, they're never not going to have a cell phone ever again.
My 4-year-old asked whether she could have one. I was like, no.
Yeah.
I was like, no. And she was like, why? And it's like, you try to make it as simple as possible. But it's like, I think the pressure is when she goes to school, because she's starting school next week. And I don't expect kids to have mobile phones at that age. You never know. But if it's that peer pressure or that pressure when they
I'm sure
is the same age,
I am not saying that is easy. I'm just saying that is what I would recommend. In the United States, there is a movement called Wait Until 8th, which is parents who organize around the notion of waiting until the 8th grade to get their children phones. And for any parent who is looking for support in delaying the onset of cell phones into their child's life, the Wait Until Eighth movement has a lot of those types of resources to support you. And then, yeah, teach your child the proximity rules as early as possible. So, not carrying the phone and I know, again, I don't want to pretend that this is hard, that this is easy with children, especially, if they're out of your eyesight for huge chunks of the day and you have no idea if they're really following. But this is what I would do, is do what you can to teach those proximity rules, meaning don't carry the phone in the pocket or anywhere immediately on your body unless it's in airplane mode. Don't use a laptop on the lap. Don't allow the child to hold a tablet, directly in their lap. Teach them the distance, because the distance is the single most, other than turning off the device, the distance is the single most powerful thing that you can do to protect yourself from these exposures. So those are the three things I would recommend for children or parents of children.
That's great. And that's the same thing for adults as well, isn't it? End of the day.
Yeah.
Well, it's more or less the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
And the last question before we finish, what does health mean to you?
Oh, wow. What does health mean to me? It means the ability to live comfortably.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think this is going to help a lot of people, especially children, for parents, because this season is mainly about parents, and I'm pretty sure they've got some good tips from this call. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you.